Hello, everyone. This is Matt Chaptel. This is another November 6th, 2024 video. This one, though, is focused on if you're a lawful permanent resident, green card holder, or LPR, should you be worried about your status under a second Trump administration, and should you file for citizenship, called filing for naturalization? The reason I wanted to put this video out is during the first Trump administration, there was a huge spike in lawful permanent residents that were fearful of Trump and filed for citizenship. And I want to dispel some kind of misinformation or kind of myths about how vulnerable an LPR is, and talk about when you should be concerned about your status, when you might be concerned about filing for naturalization, and when you shouldn't, when even under Trump, you should feel secure in your current status. So let's talk about that a little bit. So to start, let's talk about do we anticipate any laws that may change that could affect lawful permanent residents? So the primary area of law that affects permanent residents is called grounds of deportation or removability. Even a lawful permanent resident can lose that status if they commit some act that constitutes a ground of deportation, which is typically a criminal act. So any lawful permanent resident with criminal history, what is common is a person might have a criminal violation, a conviction, a misdemeanor, even a felony, and nothing's happened. ICE has never mentioned it. Maybe the person's renewed their green card, and so a person might think it's not a problem. But you have to remember, our government simply doesn't have the resources to basically find out and enforce against any person with a ground of deportability. So just because there wasn't an enforcement issue before, obviously with Trump, there's going to be more enforcement resources and there is more vulnerability. So if you're an LPR with a criminal conviction that's never been kind of analyzed by a lawyer, I highly recommend you talk to a lawyer about that. Could the grounds of deportation change and become broader? I don't think that's going to be a focus of the Trump administration. The last time that was done was in 1996, and they were actually made quite strict then. I think Trump will be more focused on enforcement, more focused on the southern border, and more focused on asylum. That's my prediction. So I don't anticipate significant changes there. What I do think is logical, and we saw the first time logical in terms of what to expect from Trump, is immigration officers are going to be much stricter. Those that maybe feel like it's their job to protect U.S. jobs, to quite honestly be anti kind of immigrant who maybe lean that way for whatever reason, are going to feel empowered. And so officers are going to be more difficult. There'll be a lot of great officers who will continue to do their jobs and who did take those jobs to be more welcoming to immigrants, but certainly the ones that are more aligned with anti kind of immigrant kind of rhetoric of Trump are going to be empowered. There are a lot of discretionary decisions. A person might have a criminal conviction close to the line, and even during the citizenship process, criminal convictions that make a person deportable can be forgiven based on discretion. That discretion certainly is not going to be used positively. Discretion, of course, meaning an officer ultimately can decide yay or nay on whether to forgive. Obviously, we're going to see much more negative discretion under a Trump administration and much fewer instances of an officer being good about forgiving something with their discretion. Now, let's talk about how can a permanent resident lose status. I think I mentioned that a second ago to some extent. If they commit an act which is a ground of deportability, they will be placed in immigration proceedings and they could lose their status and be deportable. Another way a permanent resident can lose status is if they stay out of the country for too long. If they stay out for more than 6 months, it can be deemed they abandoned their status. Permanent resident status means you primarily reside here. So be careful if you've been pushing the envelope on living abroad a lot. Officers are going to be more difficult about whether or not you've abandoned or not as well. Even though it's not a criminal violation, officers are likely to get more difficult if you're pushing the envelope in terms of how much time you spend outside of the U.S. Going back to the original question, if you are a permanent resident with no criminal history and when you got your permanent residency, everything was disclosed properly, you should not be worried about Trump attacking that status. There's no reason and no basis to attack the fact that you have permanent status in the U.S. Now, if you have any type of criminal history or things weren't disclosed correctly when you got your green card, you do need to be very careful with both your current status, and you want to get an evaluation by a lawyer, in my opinion, and whether or not to apply for naturalization. Because what we did also see with the Trump administration is people who applied to become citizens, not only were they sometimes denied, but immigration uncovered some fact that wasn't disclosed properly when they got their green card, or maybe the person thought a minor criminal violation wasn't a big issue because it was 8 years old, and it is under the Trump administration. So be careful with that. Obviously, there's a need to evaluate your case with a good lawyer if you have any type of criminal, even arrest for that matter. I always say, listen, I understand why people don't always hire immigration lawyers. It makes sense. Lawyers are expensive. It may not be necessary. But please, if you have anything irregular in your immigration history or a criminal violation, obviously you want to have a good evaluation by a lawyer before taking any next steps. Okay, everyone. Thank you.